What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Pioneer video, and today we're going to be taking a look at mono white humans for the format. People didn't seem like they were super impressed with the Boros Aggro Convoke deck, which is admittedly pretty sweet. The deck is very powerful, so if you haven't seen that video, go ahead and check that one out. It was posted last week, and like I said, it's just insane, and even did, I want to say, probably performed pretty well in like some of the Pioneer challenges and stuff. Saw that Doomwake was streaming with it for the Pioneer challenge over the weekend. But we're gonna take a look at Mono White Humans, kind of the more consistent aggro deck of the format. Just very powerful synergies in it, and of course, look forward to going over that. Plus, some of the new cards we got from March of the Machines and Aftermath as well. But of course, before we get into that, if you have not already, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, ring the notification bell so you know when videos like this and others get posted. And if you are interested even further in more content, go ahead and follow the links in the description of this video. One goes to the Discord server. Go ahead, follow that link. Feel free to join. On top of that, there's also a link to my Twitch. Oh boy, I've done it way too much. There's a link to Twitch. Go ahead, follow that uh, link, and then you'll be able to follow me on Twitch and know when I go live over there as well. All right, now that that was a lot more difficult than it needed to be, let's go ahead and take a look at Mono White Humans. We've seen this deck perform very well since the Pro Tour back in January, where this deck is just super consistent. The mana base is fairly straightforward, with like a few utility lands kind of thrown in there, and of course like Mutavault just being kind of the staple of like these monocolored aggro decks. You'd see it a lot in like mono black when like the format was first kind of coming around. Really like mono green really is like the only one that didn't pick up on it, but a lot of the other decks just playing it just because it is very good, and of course it counts as like a human for some of our human synergies. But without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the new cards that we got from the March of the Machines Aftermath. We have Coppercoat Vanguard, which gives your other humans +1/+0 and have Ward 1. So while this does not buff itself or protect itself, it does protect some of your other creatures. And even though like Ward 1 is probably arguably the worst ward, obviously like having your opponent pay life against you in like your aggro deck would be kind of nice, or discarding cards so they have less answers, or they just naturally get 2-for-1, kind of like what we see from like Graveyard Trespasser. Ward 1 is still, pretty significant in the fact that like your opponent, if you have some other like pressing creatures that you want to deal with aside from this like half like anthem effect, and ward ability, you have cards like Hopeful Initiate, which are just going to continue to get bigger, and of course can mess with like your artifacts and enchantments. Kythian, Hero of Akros, maybe the less enticing target, but does flip into a planeswalker, and you kind of want to stop that before that happens, just because he is very annoying to deal with. And of course, there's a 4/4 that is going to be unkillable at that point, and really kind of a threat unless you're like mono green. You have like Recruitment Officer, which for 4 mana you can reveal a creature with mana value 3 or less, put it in your hand, and essentially this just continues to generate card advantage over turns. So while Coppercoat Vanguard, and of course like there's these other creatures and stuff like your Thalia Heretic Cathars, your Thalias, which is already taxing your opponent's mana. Adeline being like the biggest one to follow up with after you play a Coppercoat Vanguard, which I believe also makes humans that your Coppercoat Vanguard will then protect. So while this card definitely adds a lot of power to the board and is very annoying to deal with, if your opponent just deals with this, you still have like a board of like humans and things like that that are going to be potentially buffed by like future Thalia's Lieutenants and protected by Thalia Guardians of Thraben, where it's just kind of in this weird spot where your opponent wants to deal with this card, but there are better cards that they could be dealing with, but they're probably still forced to deal with this anyway, and kind of like as like a flag bearer type effect for like your other humans and things like that. Of course, we kind of went over like some of these other cards. Knight Errant of Eos, which is also in the Boros Convoke deck, essentially is like a 5 mana 4/4 with Convoke, and pays you off for tapping more of your creatures. So while it does seem counterintuitive for an aggro deck to kind of just tap a bunch of its creatures and essentially take a turn off from attacking, you do get to make a 4/4 It does leave like your mana open, so like you're able to, take a turn off, uh, get like a Knight Errant of Eos. You look at the top 6 cards of your library, you get to reveal up to 2 creatures with mana value X or less from among them, or X is the number of creatures that convoked Knight Errant of Eos, and you put the reveal cards in your hand. Of course, like none of these cards are like super expensive, so like there is like some ways where you could like tap like a few of your creatures, or even like pre-combat or post-combat, like play a bunch of creatures and then like whatever ones you didn't attack with convoke a Knight Errant Evios and then kind of attack. But you do have some options where you could do a pre-combat to maybe go get like a Thalia's Lieutenant or like an Adeline, whatever, and then using your open mana to cast those creatures and kind of gain additional value that way. So there's definitely a time and place for playing pre-combat, playing post-combat. If you want to be able to cast things that you hit off of it, being able to mix mana in with tapping creatures, so you're able to like maybe play like 1 or 2 drops that come off of it while also still getting in a decent amount of damage. So definitely gives the deck a little bit of flexibility in like that respect. Also, if you are very very lucky, you could just hit the other Knight Errant of Eos plus another like creature or whatever, and then just kind of get to spin the wheel again and find some more creatures. This is the kind of like card advantage that this deck gets that can kind of snowball you and help you dig towards, again, some of your big hitters like, Copper Cove Vanguard, getting Thalia's Lieutenants, or getting like Thalia Heretic Cathars to make it even harder for your opponent to actually block your now amassing board of creatures. After that, like the deck is pretty much like for the most part, like par for the course. You have your Dauntless Bodyguards who you can play as like a 1 mana 2/1, just play super aggressive. Also protect your cards like Hopeful Initiate, protect your Kythians, recruitment officers, so on. Like the whole gambit of creatures here, because a lot of them are like maybe not as aggressive like on turn one as like Dauntless Bodyguard, but like getting to protect like an Adeline, for multiple turns is very good because Adeline can just snowball and get really out of control and force your opponent to block it while also, having like these other 2, 3 power humans that they have to deal with and forcing some really bad blocks on their part. Brutal Cathar being a staple of the deck, just kind of being removal that the deck needs, and also being able to kind of like, dump your whole hand, and then like Brutal Cathar will just flip because you're not playing a spell, and then you're able to then like double spell on your turn by taking a turn off to flip it back and just continue to like mess with your opponent's board, on top of also just getting to grow it, those counters staying on the other side, and having like a 4 or 5 power first striking creature that is going to force your opponent to pay life to deal with it with its ward ability is very powerful. And it doesn't necessarily like win the game on its own, but is super annoying to deal with. And obviously bad if your opponent is able to deal with it if you take multiple of their creatures. But a lot of the times they're just dead before it even matters. Thalia Heretic Cathar might be a card that people are not like familiar with. This came out in the Eldritch Moon, you know, uh, Return to Innistrad, like kind of set way back in the day. 3 mana, 3/2 first strike, and creatures and non-basic lands your opponent's controls enters the battlefield tapped. Essentially, this is like a way that your opponent is going to have a hard time just like playing creatures to stop your creatures. Obviously, kind of a big problem for like these mono white decks is if you're able to get to the board pretty early and often, is going to kind of struggle to beat through damage. You're going to stare at each other. Thalia kind of allows the deck to, you know, attack, force some trades, maybe like force your opponent to chump block, and then your opponent's like going to have to wait a turn with the creatures that they play before they're able to actually block with them, which can sometimes give you like a turn or two to just get in a ton of damage, and then eventually get to the point where they just cannot keep up and cannot play enough creatures early enough to stop your ever growing board that is going as wide as it is tall. So, can be very brutal for a lot of decks, and especially like the mirrors as well, where you can play like 2, 3, 4 creatures at a time, in like the late game. Especially with like some of the card draw that you get from like Knight Errant Eos and Recruitment Officer and Thalia can just kind of like stymie a lot of that growth. You have cards like, I mean, Thalia's Lieutenant, uh, growing the team when it enters the battlefield, and when other humans enter the play, growing the Thalia's Lieutenant, which can obviously make some blocking decisions very difficult. You do play something other than creatures in this deck. which is like 2 Brave the Elements, which gives your white creatures protection from a chosen color until end of turn. Notably, you do not have to name the color as you are casting the spell. You only name the color when it resolves. So, that's kind of a way that you can force your opponent to do things. You don't have to answer the color question until your spell resolves. You also have Ossification, which is enchants a basic land you control. You're playing 14 of them. More than likely, you're going to have a basic land to be able to enchant with Ossification. And it also just gets rid of a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. And like some of the like mirrors like this could be pretty difficult, but I believe with mono whites like kind of like share and stuff like that, you're probably not going to be seeing a lot of like mono white in the format, or at least like running into the mirror if you're playing mono white. So like ossification a lot of the time I feel is going to deal with a problematic permanent and probably deal with a problematic permanent up until it either doesn't matter on your end because you're either winning the game or losing the game pretty handily at that point. We mentioned that this deck is playing a few utility lands, of course, like there's the four Mutavault that we mentioned earlier. We have a Ganjo, Seat of the Empire, which is essentially like a land that will produce a white mana, comes into play untapped, but also has the added benefit of getting to pay 3, deal 4 damage to attacking or blocking creature. Of course, it costs 1 less if you have a legendary creature, or for each legendary creature, excuse me. So you have like Kithian that can reduce it. You have Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, and Thalia, Heretic Cathar, as well as Adeline to kind of make it cheaper, And if you're able to get it down to like 1 mana, again, like this just makes like blocking on your opponent's part really difficult. I feel like a lot of times that this card is used like defensively. Your opponent attacks with like their big creature, and this card just kind of like kills it. But a lot of the time, like you can force some really bad blocks and then just kind of like blow them out with this. Your big creature gets to stick around. Whatever the case, they block multiple creatures, kill their biggest thing, and then continue to rumble, and your opponent is probably dead from that point unless they have like a sweeper. Castle Ardenvale makes 1/1 humans for 4 mana, and of course tapping the castle, which of course has some added benefits for Thalia's Lieutenant, has added benefits for like Coppercoat Vanguard and things like that. Also, eventually allow you to convoke out Nightmare Navioses and things like that. Sideboard, pretty easy for the most part. I mean, Wedding Announcement, just getting to make 1/1s. They make 1/1 humans for, the added benefit of having synergies with all your human cards, and, can also, because you're an aggressive deck, just getting to attack with multiple creatures, continue to, like, draw cards off of this, and then eventually flip it into an Anthem. You have Gideon Allies Zendikar, which can immediately emblem to give your creatures +1/+1. Can also just make 2/2 Knight Allies. Obviously, doesn't synergize with the human part of the deck, but that said, it does, just continuing to make 2/2s, gum up the board, and then even have like a 5/5 that is just going to kind of like rumble and wreck just about anything that gets in its way and almost demands a block as well. And the fact that uh, Gideon is a white creature, it means like Brave the Elements, you could just get in for an unblockable, essentially like 5 points of damage, and probably ultimately win the game, even with like a Brave the Elements plus a board full of dorks. You have Invasion of Gokabon, or Gobakon, however you pronounce that, which is kind of like a effect where you get to look at your opponent's hand, take an out land card, it gets exiled and your opponent can play it, but it costs 2 more to play it. And then once you defeat the battle, which is pretty easy, it only has 3 battle counters on it, and like 1, maybe 2 of your creatures can handle it on its own. And then your creatures at the beginning of your end step get a +1/+1 counter on them if they attacked. Each creature that attacked this turn gets a +1/+1 counter at the beginning of your end step, and you can sacrifice to give your creatures hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So kind of plays like this role of like wanting you to be aggressive, and if your creatures survive combat, which again with cards like Brave the Elements and things like that, also getting to play like a Ganjo, whatever. You're able to kind of like put counters on your creatures, and then eventually they just end up getting so big that your opponent really isn't going to be able to deal with them. And of course, like, doesn't matter if they're human or not, like, they're going to get buffed anyway. So those Gideon tokens can get buffed as well, on top of, like, Gideon itself, if you animate it into a creature. Finally, you have, like, Destroy Evil, which, destroy target enchantment, destroy creature with toughness 4 or greater, getting rid of those big creatures so you're able to kind of get in with your smaller creatures, and then eventually the smaller creatures will be as big as those big creatures and very hard to deal with anyhow. Portable Hole, of course, is getting to mess with, some of your opponents that like to get to the board early, uh, while also like kind of like fitting your curve kind of nicely because you want to be playing like these 2s and 3s, over like your 1s because your 1s just kind of like aside from like Hopeful Initiate, like Kithian is like fine to play, later because it does have that ability to give it indestructible if you needed to and play a little bit of defense. Dauntless Bodyguard can protect something. Giant Killer can also just be used as like a removal spell as well. So that is the Mono White Humans deck for the Pioneer format. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, of course, leave a like on the video, and of course subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and ring the notification bell so you know when I videos get posted. And of course the 2 links in the description that I struggled very hard with. I would appreciate it if you follow them both. Give me a follow on Twitch as well as join the Discord server as well. That's gonna do it for me. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next video.